The dust swirled through the narrow streets of Ramadi as the sun climbed higher into the Iraqi sky. Master Chief Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow, adjusting his combat helmet while scanning the rooftops through his rifle scope. His SEAL team had been operating in this hostile section of the city for 3 weeks now, and every mission seemed to grow more dangerous than the last. Morrison's team consisted of 8 highly trained operators, each one handpicked for their specific skills. There was Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert who could disarm any explosive device with steady hands and nerves of steel. Next to him crouched Williams, their communications specialist who kept them connected to base despite the constant interference from damaged infrastructure. The youngest member of their squad was Petty Officer First Class Danny Chun, barely 25 but already proven in multiple combat zones. The intelligence briefing that morning had indicated increased insurgent activity in their sector. Local informants reported weapons caches being moved under cover of darkness, and coalition forces had intercepted radio chatter suggesting something significant was being planned. Morrison's team had been tasked with conducting reconnaissance and disrupting any hostile operations they encountered. As they moved through the rubble-strewn alleyways, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. The usual sounds of daily life were absent. No children playing in the streets, no vendors calling out their wares, no women hanging laundry from balconies. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rumble of military vehicles on the main roads. "Chief, I'm not liking this," whispered Thompson, the team's sniper, from his position 20 meters ahead. "It's too quiet. Reminds me of that ambush we walked into outside Fallujah." Morrison acknowledged with a hand signal, his years of experience telling him to trust his team's instincts. He motioned for the squad to halt and take defensive positions. They were in a particularly vulnerable spot, with tall buildings on 3 sides creating a natural kill box. The only exit was the way they had come, through a narrow passage barely wide enough for 2 men walking abreast. Rodriguez checked his equipment one more time, ensuring his explosives were secure and his detonators were functioning. He had dismantled 3 IEDs already that morning, each one more sophisticated than the last. The insurgents were learning, adapting their tactics to counter coalition procedures. What had worked 6 months ago was now obsolete, forcing the SEALs to constantly evolve their approach. The team spread out in a defensive formation, each man covering a specific sector. Years of training had made their movements automatic, almost choreographed. Morrison positioned himself near a partially collapsed wall that offered both cover and a good field of view. Through his earpiece, he could hear Williams coordinating with air support, ensuring they had eyes in the sky if things went sideways. Chun was checking the windows above when he spotted movement. A curtain had shifted slightly in a 3rd-floor apartment, just enough to suggest someone was watching. He reported it quietly over the team's internal communications, and Thompson immediately trained his rifle on the location. Through his high-powered scope, he could see the barrel of a weapon slowly emerging from the darkness beyond the window. "Contact, 3rd floor, northwest building," Thompson reported calmly, his finger moving to the trigger. But before he could take the shot, the world exploded around them. The first RPG slammed into the wall, just meters from Morrison's position, showering him with concrete fragments and dust. Instantly, the air filled with the sharp crack of AK-47 fire from multiple directions. The ambush had been perfectly coordinated, with insurgents positioned in overlooking buildings and concealed firing positions throughout the area. "Take cover. Return fire," Morrison shouted, though his team was already reacting. Years of combat experience kicked in as they found whatever protection they could and began engaging targets. The distinctive sound of American weapons joined the cacophony as the SEALs fought back with disciplined, accurate fire. Williams was on the radio immediately, calling for immediate air support and reinforcements. "Titan Base, this is Neptune 17. Troops in contact. Heavy enemy fire from multiple positions. Grid reference follows." His voice remained steady despite the bullets snapping overhead and the periodic explosion of RPGs impacting nearby. Rodriguez had taken position behind a burned-out car, using it as cover while he engaged insurgents in a building across the street. His M4 carbine barked in controlled bursts, each one finding its mark. To his left, Chun was laying down, suppressing fire with his light machine gun, the weapon's steady rhythm providing cover for his teammates to maneuver. The intensity of the firefight was unlike anything they had encountered in recent weeks. This wasn't a hit-and-run attack by a small group of insurgents. This was a coordinated assault by a significant force, and they had walked right into it. Morrison realized with grim certainty that their reconnaissance mission had been compromised. The enemy had known they were coming. Thompson, despite the incoming fire, maintained his position and continued to engage targets with deadly precision. His rifle spoke with measured authority, and, with each shot, an enemy gunman fell silent. But, for every insurgent he eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The buildings surrounding them were honeycombed with firing positions, each one carefully prepared for this moment. A second RPG streaked across the street, this one detonating against a wall just behind their position. The explosion sent Lopez, their medic, tumbling to the ground. He quickly regained his footing, shaking his head to clear the ringing in his ears, and immediately returned to the fight. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he ignored it, focusing on keeping his teammates in the fight. Morrison's mind raced as he assessed their situation. They were outnumbered at least 4-1, trapped in a kill zone with limited escape routes. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site well, with overlapping fields of fire that made any movement extremely dangerous. They needed to break contact and find a more defensible position, but doing so would require crossing open ground under heavy fire. Morrison to all elements. He spoke into his radio, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to punch through to the east. Thompson, can you suppress that machine gun position on the roof? Roger that, Chief. Give me 30 seconds, came a reply. The team began preparing for a fighting withdrawal, a maneuver they had practiced countless times, but which took on new urgency under actual fire. Each man would provide covering fire while others moved, leapfrogging back in a coordinated retreat. It was dangerous, but staying in place meant certain death. As Thompson engaged the enemy machine gun position, Morrison noticed something that made his blood run cold. More insurgents were appearing on the rooftops behind them, cutting off their planned escape route. They were being systematically surrounded, and the enemy's numbers seemed to be growing by the minute. Chief, we've got problems, Rodriguez called out. Multiple hostiles moving to flank us from the south. Looks like they're trying to box us in completely. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Ammunition was being consumed at an alarming rate, and despite their superior training and accuracy, the sheer volume of enemy fire was taking its toll. The wall Morrison was using for cover was being steadily chipped away by incoming rounds, and he knew it wouldn't last much longer. Williams continued his desperate calls for support, but the nearest quick reaction force was at least 15 minutes away. In a firefight of this intensity, 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Air support was inbound, but the narrow streets and tall buildings would make it difficult for helicopters to engage effectively without risking friendly fire. Chen's machine gun fell silent as he changed barrels, the original one glowing red-hot from sustained fire. In those few seconds of vulnerability, an insurgent RPG team managed to get into position on a nearby rooftop. Chun spotted them just as they were preparing to fire and shouted a warning, but it was too late. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked down from above, impacting just meters from the SEAL team's position. The explosion was deafening, and Morrison felt himself lifted off his feet and slammed into a wall. His ears rang, and his vision blurred as he struggled to regain his bearings. Through the smoke and dust, he could see his men still fighting, still holding the line despite the overwhelming odds. Lopez was moving between positions, checking on each team member despite the continuing fire. His medical bag bounced against his side as he low-crawled to reach Chun, who had taken shrapnel from the last explosion. With practiced efficiency, Lopez began treating the wounds even as bullets cracked overhead, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. The insurgents, sensing victory, pressed their attack with renewed vigor. They had the Americans trapped, outnumbered, and running low on ammunition. Some began moving closer, using the rubble and destroyed vehicles for cover as they attempted to close the distance. Their shouted commands in Arabic echoed off the buildings, coordinating their assault. Morrison knew they couldn't hold out much longer. His team was putting up a magnificent fight, but they were being steadily worn down by the sheer weight of enemy fire. He made a quick count of his remaining magazines and didn't like what he found. At this rate of expenditure, they would be down to sidearms within minutes. "All elements, this is Morrison," he called over the radio, his voice grim. "Prepare to consolidate on my position. We're going to make a stand here until relief arrives." It was a desperate measure, pulling his team into an even tighter perimeter, but it would allow them to concentrate their remaining firepower and share ammunition. One by one, his men began moving toward him, covering each other as they displaced under fire. Thompson was the last to move, maintaining his overwatch position until the last possible moment. As he prepared to displace, he spotted movement in a building that had previously been quiet. Through his scope, he could see multiple insurgents setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun. If they got that weapon operational, it would tear through the SEAL's position like tissue paper. "Heavy weapon, building 2 o'clock, 3rd floor," he reported, lining up his shot. But as he squeezed the trigger, incoming fire forced him to duck, his shot going wide. The insurgents continued setting up their weapon, and Thompson knew he had only seconds before it became operational. Meanwhile, Rodriguez had noticed something else that sent a chill down his spine. Several insurgents were moving with purpose toward a specific building, carrying what looked like ammunition boxes. But Rodriguez had seen enough IEDs to recognize the components of a large explosive device. They were planning to bring down an entire building on top of the SEAL team. "Chief, they're rigging explosives in the building to our north," he reported urgently. "Looks like they're planning to drop it on us." Morrison processed this new threat even as he continued engaging targets. They were running out of options and time. The enemy was closing in from all sides. Heavy weapons were being brought to bear, and now they faced the threat of being buried under tons of rubble. The situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. Williams' radio crackled to life with a message that provided a glimmer of hope. "Neptune 17, this is Hammer 64. Flight of 2 Apaches inbound your position. ETA, 3 minutes. Can you mark your position?" 3 minutes. They had to survive 3 more minutes. Morrison grabbed a smoke grenade from his vest and prepared to throw it, but hesitated. The smoke would mark their position for the helicopters, but it would also confirm their exact location for the enemy. It was a calculated risk, but one they had to take. "All elements, smoke out on my mark," he commanded. "Thompson, keep that heavy weapon suppressed. Rodriguez, see if you can slow down those demolitions. Everyone else, make your shots count. We need to hold for 3 more minutes." The team acknowledged their training and professionalism evident even in this desperate situation. Despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly surrounded, not one of them showed any sign of panic. They were SEALs, the best of the best, and they would fight to their last round and last breath. Morrison pulled the pin on the smoke grenade and tossed it into the street. Purple smoke began billowing up, a beacon for their salvation, but also a target marker for their enemies. The insurgents, recognizing what the smoke meant, intensified their attack, knowing they had only minutes before American air power arrived. The battle reached a fever pitch as both sides fought with desperate intensity. The SEALs' disciplined fire continued to take a toll on the attackers, but their ammunition was critically low. Chun was down to his last belt for the machine gun, and several team members had already transitioned to their sidearms. Thompson finally got a clear shot at the heavy weapon position and didn't waste it. His rifle cracked, and the insurgent manning the weapon crumpled. But another immediately took his place, and the weapon began firing, its heavy rounds smashing into the SEAL's position with devastating effect. Concrete and metal flew through the air as the heavy machine gun tore apart their cover. Morrison felt a round tug at his vest, the ceramic plate absorbing the impact but knocking the wind out of him. To his left, he heard someone cry out in pain, but couldn't identify who in the chaos of the moment. Lopez was immediately moving toward the wounded man, his medical training overriding the instinct for self-preservation. He found Ramirez, their rear security, clutching his shoulder where a round had found a gap in his body armor. Lopez went to work, applying pressure and preparing a battlefield dressing even as the heavy machine gun continued its deadly work. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible over the gunfire, growing louder by the second. The cavalry was coming, but would they arrive in time? The insurgents seemed to redouble their efforts, knowing their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Rodriguez had managed to pick off several insurgents near the building rigged with explosives, but he could see others continuing the work. He made a quick calculation of distances and blast radius, concluding that even if they weren't directly under the building when it came down, they would still be caught in the collapse zone. "Chief, we need to move now," he shouted. "That building's coming down any second." Morrison looked at their situation. Moving meant crossing open ground under heavy fire, but staying meant being buried under tons of concrete and steel. It was a devil's choice, but one that had to be made immediately. "All elements, we're moving south on my command," he decided. Bounding Overwatch, teams of 2. Thompson and Williams first, then Chun and Lopez with Ramirez. Rodriguez and Martinez follow. I'll bring up the rear with Johnson. "Move." The SEALs began their desperate displacement, each pair moving while the others provided covering fire. It was textbook tactics executed under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Thompson and Williams sprinted across the open ground, bullets kicking up dust around their feet before diving behind a low wall. As Chun and Lopez prepared to move with the wounded Ramirez between them, the distinctive whoosh of an RPG filled the air. The rocket streaked past, missing by mere inches before impacting a building behind them. The explosion showered them with debris, but they kept moving, half carrying, half dragging their wounded teammate to safety. The Apache helicopters appeared overhead like avenging angels, their chain guns already engaging targets. The distinctive sound of the 30mm cannon was music to the SEALs' ears as it tore through insurgent positions with devastating effectiveness. Buildings that had been spitting death moments before were reduced to rubble under the helicopter's precise fire. But even as salvation arrived, the building Rodriguez had warned about began to collapse. The insurgents had detonated their charges, and tons of concrete and steel began falling toward the street. The SEALs ran for their lives as the structure came apart behind them, a cloud of dust and debris chasing them like a tidal wave. Morrison was the last to clear the collapse zone, diving forward just as the building crashed down where they had been positioned moments before. The impact shook the ground, and the dust cloud enveloped everything, reducing visibility to mere meters. But they were alive, all of them, though battered and bloodied. The Apaches continued their work, systematically eliminating resistance as more coalition forces arrived on scene. Bradley fighting vehicles appeared at the end of the street, their 25mm cannons adding to the overwhelming firepower now being brought to bear on the insurgent positions. The ambush had been broken. As the dust settled and the firing died down, Morrison conducted a quick assessment of his team. They were all alive, though Ramirez would need immediate medical evacuation. They had expended almost all their ammunition, their equipment was damaged, and they were exhausted from the intense firefight. But they had survived against overwhelming odds. Williams was already on the radio, coordinating the medical evacuation and debriefing higher command on the situation. The intelligence failure that had led them into the ambush would need to be investigated, but that was for later. Right now, Morrison was just grateful that all his men were going home. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of what they had faced. Intelligence officers would later estimate that over 60 insurgents had participated in the ambush, with positions prepared days in advance. It had been a carefully orchestrated trap, and only the skill, training, and courage of the SEAL team had prevented it from becoming a massacre. As the medical evacuation helicopter arrived to take Ramirez and the other wounded, Morrison gathered his team. They were dirty, exhausted, and running on adrenaline, but they were alive. They had faced one of the most intense ambushes of the Iraq War and emerged victorious, though the cost had been high. The lessons learned from this engagement would be studied and incorporated into future training. The insurgents were evolving their tactics, becoming more sophisticated and dangerous. But the SEALs would adapt as well, learning from each encounter and becoming even more effective in their mission. As they loaded into vehicles for the trip back to base, Morrison looked back at the devastation they were leaving behind. The street was littered with debris, destroyed buildings, and the remnants of what had been carefully prepared insurgent positions. It had been a close thing, closer than he cared to admit, but they had prevailed. The sun was beginning to set over Ramadi as the convoy departed, casting long shadows across the war-torn city. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new dangers. But for now, Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His team had faced death and emerged victorious. They were SEALs, and this was what they were trained for. The radio traffic was full of reports from other units engaging insurgent forces throughout the city. The battle for Ramadi was far from over, and the SEALs would be called upon again and again to undertake the most dangerous missions. But Morrison knew his team was ready. They had been tested in the crucible of combat and had not been found wanting. As the base came into view, Morrison could see other teams preparing for night operations. The war continued, relentless and unforgiving. But the bonds forged in battles like today's would see them through whatever challenges lay ahead. They were more than just a team. They were brothers, united by shared danger and mutual trust. The debriefing would be long and detailed, every aspect of the engagement analyzed for lessons learned. But that was for later. Right now, Morrison was focused on ensuring his wounded were properly cared for, and his team had a chance to rest and rearm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them as they always did, together. The medical facilities at Camp Ramadi were overwhelmed with casualties from across the region, but the SEAL team received priority treatment for their wounded. Ramirez was immediately taken into surgery, the doctors working to repair the damage to his shoulder while Morrison waited anxiously outside. The rest of the team underwent medical evaluations, treating minor wounds and documenting injuries for their records. In the command center, intelligence officers pored over the after-action reports, trying to understand how such a large insurgent force had managed to coordinate an ambush without detection. Satellite imagery from before the engagement showed normal activity patterns, suggesting the enemy had moved into position shortly before the SEALs arrived. It was a level of operational security that indicated improved training and leadership among the insurgent forces. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the task force commander, called Morrison into his office as soon as the initial debriefing was complete. The room was sparse, furnished only with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and maps covering every wall. Harrison was a veteran of multiple deployments, his weathered face showing the strain of commanding special operations in such a volatile environment. "Hell of a fight out there today, Master Chief," Harrison began, gesturing for Morrison to sit. "Initial estimates put enemy casualties at over 30 Kia, with more wounded. Your team performed exceptionally under extreme circumstances." Morrison nodded, though he took little satisfaction in the body count. "They were ready for us, sir. This wasn't random. They knew we were coming." Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "That's what concerns me. We've had several operations compromised in the last month. Either we have a leak, or the enemy has significantly improved their intelligence gathering capabilities. Either way, we need to adapt our tactics." The discussion continued for another hour, covering everything from communication security to the need for better intelligence vetting. Morrison provided detailed observations about the insurgents' tactics, noting their improved coordination and the presence of what appeared to be foreign fighters among their ranks. The enemy was evolving, becoming more dangerous with each passing month. After leaving the commander's office, Morrison returned to his team's quarters. Despite their exhaustion, most of his men were still awake, the adrenaline from combat slow to fade. They sat in small groups, cleaning weapons and equipment while quietly discussing the day's events. The ritual of maintaining their gear was therapeutic, a way to process what they had experienced. Thompson was meticulously cleaning his sniper rifle, breaking it down to its component parts with practiced ease. Each piece was inspected, cleaned, and oiled before being carefully reassembled. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, every movement deliberate and exact. The rifle was more than just a tool. It was an extension of himself, and its maintenance was almost meditative. 27 confirmed, Williams said quietly, referring to Thompson's kill count from the engagement. That's got to be some kind of record for a single firefight. Thompson shook his head, continuing his work without looking up. Numbers don't matter. What matters is that we all made it out. Could have easily gone the other way. Chun, his arm in a sling from the shrapnel wounds, was struggling to clean his machine gun one-handed. Without a word, Rodriguez moved over to help, taking the weapon and beginning to break it down. It was these small acts of brotherhood that defined the team as much as their performance in combat. Lopez entered the quarters, fresh from checking on Ramirez at the medical facility. Surgery went well, he reported. Full recovery expected, though he'll be stateside for rehabilitation. Probably looking at 3 to 4 months before he's operational again. The news was met with relief, though the loss of Ramirez, even temporarily, would be felt. Each member of the team brought specific skills and experience that couldn't be easily replaced. A new operator would be assigned, but it would take time to integrate them into the team's dynamics. Morrison gathered his men for an informal after-action review. These sessions were crucial for identifying what went right, what went wrong, and how they could improve. Every opinion was valued, from the most senior operator to the newest member of the team. It was this commitment to continuous improvement that made the SEALs the elite force they were. Let's start with what we did right, Morrison began. Despite being outnumbered and ambushed, we maintained fire discipline and communication throughout the engagement. Nobody panicked, everybody did their job. The discussion continued for hours, covering everything from individual actions to overall tactics. They identified several areas for improvement, including the need for better reconnaissance of urban areas before committing to operations. The insurgents had used the terrain to their advantage, and the SEALs needed to be more aware of potential ambush sites. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook adrenaline, and the team began to disperse to their bunks. Morrison remained awake, writing his formal after-action report and recommendations for future operations. Every detail had to be documented, every lesson learned captured for future reference. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings, equipment replacement, and planning for future operations. The ambush had made headlines back home, with media outlets portraying it as both a tactical victory and a reminder of the dangers faced by American forces in Iraq. Politicians debated the meaning and implications, but for the men on the ground, it was simply another day in a long war. Intelligence reports began to paint a clearer picture of what the team had faced. The insurgent force had included several foreign fighters, including some with training from camps in Syria and Iran. Captured documents revealed plans for similar ambushes throughout Ramadi, targeting coalition forces with increasingly sophisticated tactics. Morrison spent hours studying these reports, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The enemy was adapting, but so were the coalition forces. New technologies were being deployed, including improved surveillance drones and signal intelligence capabilities. The key was staying one step ahead in an ever-evolving conflict. A week after the ambush, the team received a new member to replace the wounded Ramirez. Petty Officer Second Class Michael Foster was fresh from advanced training, eager but untested in combat. Morrison knew the importance of integrating new team members carefully. In the SEALs, trust was earned through actions, not words. Foster was put through his paces in training exercises designed to test his skills and judgment under pressure. The team ran through urban combat drills, practicing room clearing and street movement until every action was automatic. Foster showed promise, his reactions quick and his marksmanship excellent, but Morrison knew the real test would come under actual fire. The integration process was interrupted by new intelligence indicating a high-value target had been identified in their sector. A senior insurgent leader, responsible for coordinating attacks throughout western Iraq, had been tracked to a compound on the outskirts of Ramadi. It was an opportunity too good to pass up, despite the risks involved. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility, with representatives from multiple intelligence agencies present. Satellite imagery showed a walled compound with multiple buildings, guard posts, and what appeared to be a tunnel system for escape. It would be a challenging target, especially given the increased insurgent awareness following the recent ambush. Morrison studied the intelligence carefully, looking for any signs of deception or trap. The source was credible, having provided accurate information in the past, but the timing was concerning. Were the insurgents using the high-value target as bait for another ambush? Every possibility had to be considered and planned for. The assault would be a joint operation, with Morrison's SEAL team providing the main assault element while Rangers secured the perimeter and helicopters provided overhead support. It was a complex operation requiring precise timing and coordination between multiple units. Any mistake could result in disaster. Preparation began immediately, with the team conducting rehearsals using a mock-up of the target compound. Every aspect of the operation was practiced repeatedly, from the initial insertion to the extraction of any captured personnel. Foster was assigned a supporting role, allowing him to participate while minimizing his exposure as the newest team member. Morrison worked closely with the other unit commanders, ensuring everyone understood their roles and responsibilities. The Rangers would establish blocking positions to prevent enemy reinforcement or escape, while the SEALs conducted the actual assault on the compound. Air support would be on station throughout, ready to engage any threats that emerged. As the operation date approached, tension within the team was palpable but controlled. They had learned from the recent ambush, implementing new procedures for detecting and avoiding enemy traps. Every piece of equipment was checked and rechecked, every contingency planned for. They would not be caught off guard again. The night before the operation, Morrison gathered his team for a final briefing. The compound layout was reviewed one more time, with each man confirming his understanding of his role. Communication procedures were rehearsed, ensuring everyone knew the backup frequencies and code words. Nothing was left to chance. Remember, speed and violence of action, Morrison emphasized. We hit them hard and fast before they can react. Thompson, you'll provide overwatch from the adjacent building. Williams, I need you coordinating with air support throughout. If this goes sideways, we need immediate extraction capability. The team acknowledged their assignments with quiet professionalism. They had conducted dozens of similar operations, but each one carried the potential for catastrophe. The enemy had proven their capability in the recent ambush, and there was no reason to believe they would be any less dangerous tonight. As darkness fell over Ramadi, the various elements of the assault force began moving to their staging positions. The SEALs loaded into their vehicles, weapons locked and loaded, night vision devices tested and ready. Foster sat quietly among the veterans, his nervous energy carefully controlled as he prepared for his first combat operation with the team. The drive to the target area was conducted in complete darkness, the drivers using night vision to navigate the war-torn streets. Radio silence was maintained except for essential communications, each unit tracking the others through encrypted GPS systems. The insurgents had proven adept at intercepting communications, making operational security paramount. At the designated release point, the team dismounted and began their approach on foot. They moved like shadows through the darkness, their training evident in every step. Years of practice had made them nearly invisible in the night, each man aware of his teammates' positions without needing to look. The compound came into view exactly as the intelligence had described it. High walls topped with razor wire surrounded multiple buildings, with guards visible at several positions. Morrison counted at least 6 sentries, though there were likely more hidden from view. The assault would need to be swift and overwhelming to prevent the target from escaping. Thompson and his spotter separated from the main group, moving to establish their overwatch position. Within minutes, they were in place, Thompson's rifle trained on the nearest guard position. His breathing was slow and controlled as he waited for the signal to initiate the assault. The Rangers reported in position, their blocking forces established at key intersections to prevent any quick reaction force from interfering. Air support confirmed they were on station, infrared cameras showing the heat signatures of personnel within the compound. Everything was set for the assault to begin. Morrison made the final checks with his team, ensuring everyone was ready. Breaching charges were prepared, weapons were on safe but ready for immediate action, and medical supplies were accessible. In moments, they would transition from stealth to violence, and there would be no turning back. The compound's main gate was reinforced steel, requiring specialized breaching charges to defeat. Rodriguez moved forward with practiced stealth, placing the charges while the rest of the team provided security. The guards continued their lazy patrol patterns, unaware that death was moments away. As Rodriguez completed his work and moved back to the stack, Morrison gave the final preparatory commands. Each man tensed, ready to explode into action. The countdown began in Morrison's head as he prepared to give the order that would initiate the assault. 3, 2, 1. The night erupted in violence as the breaching charge detonated, blowing the compound's gate off its hinges. Simultaneously, Thompson's rifle spoke, dropping the nearest guard before he could react. The SEALs flowed through the breach like water, weapons up, and searching for targets. The compound's defenders, caught completely by surprise, struggled to respond to the sudden assault. Some reached for weapons while others simply froze in shock. The SEALs gave them no time to organize a defense, engaging every armed individual with lethal precision. Williams coordinated with the circling aircraft, vectoring them onto a machine gun position that had opened fire from a rooftop. The helicopter's minigun responded with a buzzsaw sound, tearing the position apart in seconds. The precision of modern warfare was on full display as technology and training combined to devastating effect. Foster, despite being in his first combat operation with the team, performed admirably. He stayed close to Chun, learning from the veterans' movements while contributing his own firepower to the assault. When an insurgent appeared in a doorway to their left, Foster's training took over, and he dropped the target with a controlled pair to center mass. The team split into 2 elements as planned, one clearing the main building while the other secured the outbuildings and searched for tunnel entrances. Speed was essential. Every second gave the target more opportunity to escape or destroy intelligence materials. Morrison led the assault on the main building, his element stacking on the entrance while Rodriguez prepared another breaching charge. Intelligence indicated the target's quarters were on the 2nd floor, but they would need to clear systematically to avoid leaving enemies behind them. The charge detonated, and the team flowed into the building. The interior was dark, lit only by the eerie green glow of night vision devices. Room by room, they advanced, using flashbang grenades to disorient defenders before entering. Each room was cleared with textbook precision, the team moving as a single organism. Resistance inside the building was fierce but disorganized. The defenders had been caught sleeping or relaxing, their weapons not immediately accessible. Several tried to surrender, throwing down their arms and raising their hands. These were quickly secured with zip ties and left for the follow-on forces to process. On the 2nd floor, they encountered barricaded defenders who had managed to organize a defense. Automatic weapons fire filled the hallway as the SEALs took cover. This was where the high-value target would be, protected by his most loyal fighters. The team would need to be creative to break through without taking casualties. Morrison called for support from the other element, which had finished clearing the outbuildings. With additional firepower, they could assault from multiple directions, dividing the defenders' attention. It was a classic military tactic, but execution under fire required exceptional coordination and trust. As the second element moved into position, Rodriguez prepared specialized breaching charges designed to create multiple entry points simultaneously. The defenders would be forced to cover several directions at once, diluting their firepower and creating opportunities for the SEALs to exploit. The coordinated assault began with flashbang grenades thrown from multiple directions, followed immediately by the breaching charges. The explosions disoriented the defenders just as the SEALs entered from 3 different points. The fighting was intense, but brief, superior training and tactics overwhelming desperate resistance. In the target's quarters, they found evidence of a hasty evacuation attempt. Documents were scattered across a desk, some partially burned in a metal wastebasket. A laptop computer sat open, its screen showing what appeared to be communication software. Williams immediately secured the electronics, while others gathered the documents. But the high-value target himself was nowhere to be found. A quick search revealed a hidden entrance to what had to be the tunnel system intelligence had warned about. The escape route was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. The target had mere minutes head start, but in the tunnel system, that might be enough. Morrison had to make a quick decision. Pursuing into the tunnels was extremely dangerous, with the possibility of booby traps or ambush points. But letting a senior insurgent leader escape would be a significant failure. He chose a middle path, sending a small element to pursue while the rest of the team continued securing the compound and gathering intelligence. Thompson maintained his overwatch position, engaging several insurgents who attempted to approach the compound from surrounding buildings. His accurate fire prevented any organized counterattack, buying time for the assault team to complete their mission. Each shot was carefully placed, conserving ammunition while maximizing effect. The pursuit team, led by Rodriguez, entered the tunnel system with extreme caution. The narrow confines made movement difficult and dangerous, with no room to maneuver if they encountered resistance. They moved slowly, checking for trip wires or pressure plates that might trigger explosive devices. After several tense minutes, they emerged from the tunnel in a building 2 blocks away. Fresh footprints in the dust indicated their quarry had passed through recently, but the trail went cold at a street where a vehicle had obviously been waiting. The high-value target had escaped, though by the narrowest of margins. Meanwhile, the intelligence haul from the compound was proving valuable. The partially burned documents included correspondence between insurgent cells, financial records showing funding sources, and planning documents for future operations. The laptop, though password-protected, would likely yield even more valuable intelligence once the technical specialists got their hands on it. With the compound secured and resistance eliminated, Morrison called for the extraction vehicles. The operation had been largely successful despite the escape of the primary target. They had disrupted a major insurgent headquarters, eliminated numerous fighters, and captured valuable intelligence. Not every mission could achieve every objective. As they loaded into vehicles for the return to base, Foster was quietly accepted into the Brotherhood. He had performed well under fire, following orders and contributing to the team's success. Morrison made a mental note to commend him in the after-action report. The young SEAL had passed his first real test. The ride back was subdued, each man lost in his own thoughts about the operation. They had executed well, adapting to unexpected developments, and maintaining the initiative throughout. But the escape of the target was a reminder that the enemy was capable and resourceful, able to plan for contingencies just as the coalition forces did. At the base, the intelligence materials were immediately turned over to specialists who would analyze every detail. The captured insurgents were processed for interrogation, potentially providing additional information about the network they had just disrupted. Every piece of information would be used to plan future operations. The debrief was thorough but positive, with senior officers praising the team's performance while acknowledging the disappointment of missing the primary target. Lessons learned would be incorporated into future planning, particularly regarding tunnel systems and escape routes. The enemy's tactics were noted, and counters developed. Morrison was particularly pleased with how Foster had integrated into the team during his first combat operation. The young SEAL had shown courage, discipline, and good judgment under fire. With continued experience, he would become a valuable addition to the team's capabilities. As dawn broke over Ramadi, the team finally stood down from the operation. They had been in continuous action for over 12 hours, from the initial preparation through the assault and subsequent debriefing. Exhaustion was setting in, but it was the satisfied exhaustion of professionals who had executed their craft at the highest level. The war would continue tomorrow, with new targets and new challenges. The insurgents would adapt their tactics based on tonight's raid, just as the coalition forces would adapt based on capture intelligence. It was an ongoing chess match played with live ammunition and real consequences. Morrison's final thought before sleep claimed him was of a narrow escape of the high-value target. Somewhere in Ramadi, an insurgent leader was likely conducting his own after-action review, analyzing how the Americans had found him and planning how to avoid future raids. The game of cat and mouse would continue, each side learning from every encounter. But for now, his team was safe, the mission largely successful, and valuable intelligence captured. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them as they always did, as a team, as brothers, as SEALs. The brotherhood forged in combat was unbreakable, and it would see them through whatever dangers lay ahead in the streets of Ramadi. The intelligence captured from the compound raid proved to be a goldmine of information. Over the following days, analysts worked around the clock decoding encrypted files and translating documents. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of insurgent operations throughout Anbar province, including supply routes, safe houses, and financial networks that stretched across international borders. Morrison and his team were called in to review specific findings related to their area of operations. The briefing room was crowded with intelligence officers, each presenting their analysis of different aspects of the capture materials. Maps on the walls showed new target locations identified from the intelligence, creating a roadmap for future operations. One particular piece of intelligence caught Morrison's attention. Among the documents was a reference to a training camp where young insurgents were being prepared for sniper operations. The location was vague, described only as being in the industrial district of eastern Ramadi, but cross-referencing with other capture materials suggested it was still operational. The briefing officer, Major Sarah Collins, highlighted this finding with concern in her voice. We've seen a marked increase in sniper attacks over the past 2 months. If this training camp is producing qualified marksmen, it could explain the improved accuracy we've been facing. Morrison thought back to several recent operations where his team had come under accurate sniper fire. The enemy marksmen had shown patience and discipline, waiting for optimal shots rather than firing at the first opportunity. It was a level of training that suggested formal instruction rather than street-learned skills. Thompson was particularly interested in this intelligence. As the team sniper, he understood better than most the threat posed by trained enemy marksmen. Any indication of who's doing the training? He asked. The techniques we've observed suggest someone with formal military background. Major Collins pulled up another document on the screen. We believe there may be foreign instructors involved. Some of the terminology used in these training materials is consistent with Syrian or Iranian military doctrine. We're working to confirm, but it would explain the sudden improvement in their capabilities. The implications were serious. If foreign military advisors were training insurgent snipers, it represented a significant escalation in the conflict. Morrison's team would need to adjust their tactics accordingly, assuming every operation might face trained marksmen rather than poorly aimed harassment fire. Over the next week, additional intelligence operations focused on locating the suspected training camp. Surveillance drones flew constant missions over the industrial district, their cameras searching for any signs of unusual activity. Human intelligence sources were tasked with gathering information, though the industrial area's legitimate businesses provided excellent cover for illicit activities. Meanwhile, life at the base continued with its regular rhythm of missions, training, and preparation. Foster had fully integrated into the team, his performance in the compound raid earning him the respect of his teammates. He spent extra hours with Thompson, learning the finer points of urban sniper operations and counter-sniper tactics. The team conducted daily training exercises, focusing on scenarios involving enemy snipers. They practiced movement techniques designed to minimize exposure, rapid building entries to eliminate sniper positions, and coordination with air assets for immediate suppression. Every team member needed to understand the threat and how to counter it. Rodriguez worked with the explosive ordnance disposal team to develop new breaching techniques that minimized exposure time. Traditional breaching methods left operators vulnerable for several seconds while charges were placed. New shaped charges and remote detonation systems could reduce this exposure, critical when facing trained snipers. Williams coordinated with the intelligence section to improve real-time surveillance capabilities during operations. New micro-drones, small enough to fit in a pocket, could be deployed to scout ahead and identify potential sniper positions. The technology was cutting-edge, providing the team with eyes around corners and over walls without exposing personnel. 2 weeks after the compound raid, actionable intelligence finally emerged on the sniper training camp. A source reported seeing young men with rifle cases entering a seemingly abandoned factory complex before dawn. Surveillance confirmed unusual activity, including the construction of shooting positions on upper floors that would provide clear fields of fire for training purposes. The target was more complex than previous objectives. The factory complex consisted of multiple interconnected buildings spread over several acres. Intel suggested between 20 and 40 personnel might be present at any given time, including instructors and students at various stages of training. Some would be armed only with training weapons, while others might have live ammunition. Morrison studied the target package carefully, identifying numerous challenges. The complex provided countless hiding spots and defensive positions. The interconnected buildings meant enemies could move between structures without exposing themselves to outside observation. And the presence of a training cadre suggested a higher level of tactical awareness than typical insurgent groups. Planning for the operation took several days, with every detail scrutinized and debated. The assault would require multiple teams hitting simultaneously to prevent escape through the building connections. Air support would be critical, but the urban environment and risk of collateral damage limited options for heavy ordnance. A new concern emerged during planning when intelligence reported possible civilian workers in adjacent buildings. The industrial district still had operational factories, and their workers arrived before dawn, the same time frame optimal for the raid. Rules of engagement would be even more restrictive than usual, requiring positive identification before engaging targets. Morrison proposed a modified approach, using deception to draw the enemy snipers into exposed positions. By creating the appearance of a vulnerable convoy passing near the complex, they might trigger the trainees to take shooting positions, revealing their locations and allowing precision strikes before the main assault. The plan was refined through multiple iterations, incorporating input from every team member. Chun suggested using smoke grenades to create visual barriers between buildings, preventing mutual support between defensive positions. Foster, drawing on recent training, proposed specific entry points that would minimize exposure to likely sniper positions. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approved the plan with minor modifications, assigning additional assets, including a platoon of Rangers for outer security and 2 Apache helicopters for immediate air support. A psychological operations team would broadcast surrender appeals in Arabic during the assault, potentially reducing resistance from trainees who might be reluctant fighters. The night before the operation, Morrison noticed an unusual tension among his team. They had conducted dozens of raids, but something about deliberately assaulting a sniper training facility seemed to weigh on everyone's minds. Every operator understood the unique danger posed by trained marksmen in defended positions. Thompson spent extra time preparing his equipment, including a new rifle scope with enhanced magnification for counter-sniper work. He would be crucial to the operation's success, needing to identify and eliminate enemy snipers before they could engage the assault teams. The pressure was evident in his meticulous preparation. Lopez double-checked medical supplies, paying particular attention to blood-clotting agents and tourniquets. Sniper wounds were often more severe than typical combat injuries, the high-velocity rounds causing devastating damage. He briefed each team member on self-aid procedures, ensuring everyone could treat their own wounds if necessary. As the team gathered for final briefing, Morrison addressed the elephant in the room. I know what you're all thinking. Assaulting a sniper school sounds like a good way to get shot. But remember, these are trainees, not seasoned fighters. We have supplies, superior equipment, and better training. Trust your skills and watch out for each other. The deception operation began 2 hours before the main assault. A convoy of apparently vulnerable vehicles moved slowly through streets visible from the factory complex. Hidden cameras and drone surveillance watched for any reaction from within the target buildings. The bait was intentionally tempting, mimicking previous coalition patrols that had been ambushed. Within minutes, movement was detected in the factory windows. Figures with rifles took positions, tracking the convoy, but maintaining discipline by not firing. The surveillance systems mapped each position, building a real-time picture of enemy locations. The enemy snipers were revealing themselves exactly as planned. As the convoy passed out of view, the assault teams moved into position. The factory complex was surrounded, with no avenue of escape left uncovered. Morrison's team would take the main building, believed to house the primary training facilities, while other elements hit supporting structures simultaneously. Thompson and his spotter occupied a carefully chosen position in a building across from the complex. Through his scope, he could see several of the identified sniper positions. Young faces were visible behind some of the rifles, confirming intelligence about the training program's recruitment of teenagers and young adults. At Morrison's signal, the operation commenced with multiple breaching charges detonating simultaneously. The explosions shattered the pre-dawn quiet, announcing the arrival of American forces at multiple entry points. Smoke grenades followed, creating a dense screen between buildings as planned. The assault teams flowed into the buildings with practiced precision. Initial resistance was sporadic and poorly coordinated, many of the trainees freezing in shock at the sudden assault. Some attempted to flee deeper into the complex, while others tried to mount a defense from hastily chosen positions. Thompson's rifle began its deadly work, engaging identified sniper positions with mechanical precision. Each shot eliminated a threat before it could engage the assault teams. His spotter called out targets and wind corrections, the two working in perfect synchronization honed through countless hours of training. Inside the main building, Morrison's team encountered more organized resistance. The instructors, apparently veterans of previous conflicts, attempted to rally the trainees into defensive positions. The fighting was close and intense, the narrow corridors limiting maneuver options for both sides. Rodriguez led a stack clearing the second floor, where intelligence suggested the main classroom facilities were located. They found rooms set up with sand tables showing urban terrain, whiteboards covered with ballistic calculations, and racks of training rifles. It was clear this was indeed a formal training facility, not just an ad hoc gathering point. In one room, they discovered something that made Morrison's blood run cold. On the walls were photographs of American soldiers, apparently taken from sniper positions during previous attacks. Red circles marked kill shots, while notes in Arabic detailed lessons learned from each engagement. This wasn't just training, it was an analysis center for improving sniper tactics. The fighting intensified as the instructors made a stand in the building's main workshop. Using heavy machinery for cover, they put up fierce resistance. Morrison called for support from the Apaches, but the risk of collateral damage limited options. They would have to clear the position the hard way. Foster distinguished himself during this phase, using his grenade launcher to place precise shots behind the machinery where direct fire couldn't reach. The explosions flushed defenders from cover, allowing other team members to engage them. It was textbook fire and maneuver executed under the most challenging conditions. Williams coordinated multiple elements over the radio, ensuring no friendly fire incidents as teams converged from different directions. The complex nature of the operation, with multiple buildings and teams involved, required exceptional communication discipline. One mistake could result in Americans firing on each other in the confusion. As the sun began to rise, resistance in the main building finally crumbled. The surviving instructors attempted to escape through a loading dock, but ran directly into Rangers' position for exactly that contingency. Faced with overwhelming firepower, they surrendered, ending the main phase of the assault. The clearing operations revealed the true extent of the training facility. In addition to marksmanship training, they found evidence of instruction in bomb-making, surveillance techniques, and target selection. A computer lab contained databases of coalition patrol patterns and personnel movements painstakingly compiled from months of observation. Most disturbing was a graduation wall featuring photographs of trainees who had completed the program. Each photo included the number of confirmed kills attributed to that sniper. Some showed teenagers who looked barely old enough to shave, but their kill counts suggested they had been active for months. Among the captured personnel was a foreign instructor who initially refused to speak. His equipment and personal effects suggested Iranian military training, confirming suspicions about external support for the insurgency. Intelligence officers would have a field day interrogating him once he was processed. The haul of captured weapons was impressive and concerning. In addition to standard rifles, the facility had several high-end sniper systems, including some models equivalent to what American forces used. Specialized ammunition, range-finding equipment, and ballistic computers showed the sophistication of the training program. Morrison found himself in what appeared to be the commander's office, reviewing documents that outlined expansion plans for the training program. There were references to establishing similar facilities in other cities, creating a network of trained snipers throughout Iraq. The coalition forces had disrupted this plan just in time. As the site was systematically exploited for intelligence, the human cost became apparent. Several young trainees had been killed in the assault, their bodies showing they had been armed and resisting. Morrison felt no satisfaction in these deaths. These were not hardened terrorists, but young men, some barely adults who had been recruited and indoctrinated into the insurgency. The operation was deemed a complete success from a tactical perspective. The sniper training facility was eliminated, instructors captured or killed, and valuable intelligence secured. But Morrison knew this was just one victory in a much larger conflict. Other training camps existed, and the insurgency would adapt to this loss. During the return to base, the team was unusually quiet. The operation had been successful, but the evidence of how organized and sophisticated their enemy had become was sobering. The days of fighting poorly trained insurgents with basic weapons were clearly over. They now faced an enemy receiving professional military training. The debriefing lasted hours, with every aspect of the operation analyzed in detail. The intelligence captured would take weeks to fully exploit, but initial assessments suggested they had significantly disrupted insurgent sniper operations throughout western Iraq. The foreign instructor's capture was particularly valuable, potentially revealing international support networks. Thompson received particular commendation for his performance, with confirmed elimination of 8 enemy snipers before they could engage friendly forces. His actions had undoubtedly saved American lives, preventing what could have been a costly urban battle against prepared marksmen in defensive positions. Foster's performance also earned praise, with his tactical innovations and calm under fire noted in the official report. He had proven himself worthy of the trident he wore, transitioning from training to combat with remarkable effectiveness. Morrison made a note to recommend him for Advanced Urban Warfare School. The intelligence team worked around the clock analyzing capture materials. The computer systems yielded a treasure trove of information, including communication logs with other insurgent cells. Several high-value targets were identified from these communications, setting up future operations for the task force. One particular discovery changed the tactical picture significantly. Analysis of the sniper training materials revealed they were specifically targeting American communication and leadership elements. Photos showed radio operators and officers circled as priority targets, with detailed notes on identifying them by equipment and behavior patterns. This intelligence prompted immediate changes to coalition tactics. Radio antennas were modified to be less conspicuous. Officer insignia were removed or subdued, and communication procedures were altered to avoid predictable patterns. The enemy's targeting methodology was sophisticated, but knowing it allowed effective counters. Morrison spent considerable time reviewing the operation with his team, identifying lessons learned and areas for improvement. The complex urban environment had presented numerous challenges, and they discussed new techniques for clearing interconnected buildings. Every experience added to their collective knowledge base. The impact of eliminating the sniper school became apparent over the following weeks. Sniper attacks in western Iraq dropped dramatically, and those that did occur showed markedly less skill. The coalition had removed a critical capability from the insurgent arsenal, though everyone knew it was likely temporary. Reports from other units operating in the area confirmed the disruption to insurgent operations. Several planned ambushes were apparently canceled due to lack of trained marksmen. The psychological impact on the insurgency was significant, knowing the coalition could identify and eliminate their training facilities. But even as they celebrated this tactical success, new intelligence suggested the insurgency was adapting. Reports of training activities in Syria increased, potentially moving operations outside the reach of coalition forces. The enemy was learning too, adjusting their operations to avoid detection and attack. Morrison knew they had won an important battle, but the war was far from over. Each success brought new challenges as both sides adapted to the other's tactics. The young snipers they had prevented from graduating would be replaced by others, trained in new locations with new security measures. As he finished his final report on the operation, Morrison reflected on the nature of counterinsurgency warfare. Unlike conventional conflicts with clear objectives and defined enemies, this war was a constant chess match of move and countermove. Today's victory could become tomorrow's vulnerability if they became complacent. The team had performed exceptionally, adapting to challenges and overcoming a dangerous enemy in a complex environment. But Morrison knew the hardest battles might still lie ahead. The insurgency had shown its ability to evolve, and the coalition forces would need to stay ahead of that evolution. Outside his window, the sun set over Ramadi, painting the war-torn city in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in those streets, new insurgents were being recruited, new plans being made, new tactics being developed. The war would continue tomorrow, and Morrison's team would be ready. The elimination of the sniper school was a significant victory, but it was just one chapter in a longer story. The SEALs had proven once again their ability to execute complex operations under dangerous conditions. But the ultimate victory in this conflict would require more than tactical success. It would require patience, persistence, and the continued courage of America's finest warriors.